Joining me now to discuss what we're watching here on the floor and what we could see happen here not long from now. A final vote. Jay O'Brien is here in Washington. Also, ABC News contributor, former senior CIA field operative Daryl Blocker, and ABC News senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez. Jay, let's go ahead and start with you and just talk about how this deal came together to clear the way for this spending bill. It's maybe kind of piece by piece. It's a bit complicated, but we'll try to make sense of it as we're following the vote there.
Yeah, it's a $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill. Lawmakers have until Friday at midnight to pass it in both the Senate and the House to fund the government and avoid a government shutdown. It was full steam ahead last night to pass, and then there was, as you said, that amendment from Mike Lee that threw a wrench into the gears here because there was a concern that if that Title 42 amendment got added to the legislation, that there was not a shot that Democrats in the House of Representatives, who control that chamber until early January, would pass the legislation with that Title 42 provision in. That fails earlier this afternoon, and now, look, you can see it on your screen there, the Senate moving incredibly quickly to get through all of those amendments as they just did, and now they're in the final vote that votes on the omnibus. Why it comes together, partly it has to do with that Mike Lee amendment failing, but also, Kira, as you know, there is something called Senate magic, where members of the Senate want to get on planes, they want to go home. It's Thursday. There are few flights now between D.C. and their home states before the holidays. So there is this magic where this legislation that would typically take somewhat longer moves at record pace. Lawmakers get it done because A, they have that Friday at midnight deadline, but B, they want to get out of town and move this legislation to the House, where I can tell you the sense we get from House Democrats is they are poised to move on this and to pass it quickly once they get it in their hands from the Senate, which is likely to happen within the hour, Kira.
Yeah, it's fair to say they are moving at unprecedented speed, aren't they? They have a lot to focus on to keep moving quickly. And Jay, the bill, let's talk about what it includes. I mean, it's nearly $45 billion in additional funding for Ukraine. Clearly, a lot of money. Zelensky made his plea for more aid last night in that compelling speech before Congress. How do you think, I mean, that played as, here we go to pictures now as we follow the vote on the floor, but this was Zelensky there. Not wasting any time from the minute he touched down in D.C. to the White House, to the Oval, to a joint press conference, to his primetime speech right there before Congress. How do you think this is all playing from talking about unprecedented speed from his visit to today and this funding?
Yeah, and this funding is in the omnibus bill from early on. So it's not added in the last minute because of Zelensky's remarks, but you're exactly right. I mean, the purpose of that visit from Zelensky was to advocate for more aid from the United States government to Ukraine, both from the administration, but also from the Congress. So his visit was twofold. You heard him say that $45 billion in the omnibus would be helpful for Ukraine. So he asked the Congress to vote for that, but also he set Ukraine up for future requests, for future aid that could come to help them aid in their fight against the Russians, which might face some impediments come January, not necessarily in this chamber that you're watching right now, the United States Senate, but certainly in the House, where Republicans are poised to take control in early January. And some have said, including Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader, that they don't want to write a quote-unquote blank check to Ukraine, Kira.
So let's follow up with Zelensky just getting here to the States. Daryl, as a former senior CIA field operative, you know what missions like this entail when you have a wartime president trying to get to the States. I mean, it was shrouded in secrecy, of course, for his safety. I remember when we got word just a few days ago that he could be coming here. I checked in with a few members of Congress, and they said, yes, I can tell you off the record that it's happening, but we think it's going to be by Zoom. Why would he leave the country? So everybody was caught by surprise when they found out he was actually here in the United States on the ground. So just tell us what went into sort of keeping this a secret and just getting him here and getting him back.
Well, that process is fairly robust. You know, the Secret Service, of course, protects all foreign heads of state when they come to the United States. They also coordinate with the Capitol Police. They coordinate with diplomatic security. And of course, from the trip from the Ukraine to the United States, they would have used Pentagon. So it wasn't particularly daunting or dangerous. And this is the first wartime president to speak to a joint session of Congress since Winston Churchill. It is that important. So Zoom would not have had the same impact. And having him standing there before the American people and our representatives was very powerful.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Daryl, what did you think? We were all commenting from the minute he arrived at the White House. There he was in his combat boots, his BDUs, and his sweatshirt, straight off the front lines. He was sending a number of messages there, and to make the point, too, all the way up to the primetime speech, he didn't even change. He's like, here I am, straight off the battlefield. This is what I need. Thank you for support. I've got to address all of you. He really did own this moment, didn't he?
He did indeed, and he proved that he is a wartime president. He's not making any claims that he's coming here to vacation or do anything else except for to fight for his people and to fight for the weapons that they want to continue to get into country.
All right, Louis, let's just break down the aid in this new spending package compared to the military aid package that was announced.
Yes, Kira, the $45 billion that's included in this omnibus bill kind of reflects everything that the United States has been doing with regards to Ukraine by providing it military support, by providing it billions to keep the government running, in effect, and also to fund the presence of the U.S. military troops that have been shifted to Eastern Europe. So if we can give you the breakdown, it's going to be nearly $12 billion to replace the equipment that has been sent to Ukraine from existing U.S. military arsenal. It's about $9 billion that's going to go towards buying future purchases for Ukraine down the long term. And then another $7 billion for those American troops in Europe, $15 billion, which is going to the Ukrainian government itself. $13 billion of that is going towards the funding of Ukraine's government. The balance of that is going towards the resettlement of Ukrainians around the world. So it's a package that reflects exactly what the United States has been doing over the last 10 months. And Kira, it is even more than the administration wanted. The administration had wanted $37 billion. Congress has given them $8 billion more, and that's why you're seeing this $45 billion that's included inside this package.
All right, let's go ahead and get to the Senate floor there and listen in for a moment as we see so far 68 yay, 29 nay.
The Senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
There you go, live pictures from the Senate floor as it passes that $1.7 trillion spending bill. Jay O'Brien, we were trying to figure out if we were going to be able to listen in there. There was a little bit from Mitch McConnell, and then it looks like members. It looks like they're voting and they're clearing the room, like you said, moving at unprecedented speed. But it looks like they have reached a deal. It has passed. Paving the way, hopefully, to avoid a Christmas Eve shutdown. Let's just kind of lay out what happens next as they clear the room.
Yeah, and let me walk you through what you just saw, Kira. So that title screen that you saw come up that showed just before the video went to Patrick Leahy, who's sitting there in the big chair there in the Senate. That title screen that showed 68-29, that was when, right after the bill had passed. That's the final vote, 68-29. The omnibus has passed the Senate. It now goes over to the House of Representatives, where, again, as we were saying earlier, I can tell you there is a sense that Democrats who control that chamber will work to pass it quickly as their colleagues in the United States Senate work to get flights home and get home to the holidays relatively quickly. Again, the reason why this comes together and those amendments are cleared with such speed is because of, for a number of reasons, but one of them is Senate magic, this deadline that lawmakers are on. The first deadline, they got to get home for the holidays. But the bigger, more pressing deadline, which is that Friday midnight deadline, this omnibus has to pass by then in order to avoid a government shutdown. The sense right now is that it is full steam ahead in the House, and it will pass before that crucial deadline. But it's Congress, and you've got to kind of take these things one step at a time. But again, that's its next step. It goes to the House, where it faces that vote, and they are up against that Friday midnight deadline. Now, what we heard from House leadership is that they believe they could take up a vote on this as early as tonight. The House is ready to go. They were expecting to get this legislation from the Senate, so they are prepared to vote on this incredibly early. You could have some resolution for this early Friday morning. But again, the news that you're watching now play out on your screen as you see the Senate floor as they go into their regular business is that omnibus has passed the Senate, Kira.
And those plans were delayed after we mentioned this when Democrats rejected that proposal by Republicans. You mentioned Senator Mike Lee. Title 42 was a bit of a holdup there. It would have extended the pandemic-era asylum restrictions. We talked a lot about the buildup at the southern border. That kind of threw a wrench into things, delayed things. So where do things stand now moving forward with that?
Well, and what's in it, I think, is a really good question because it's a $1.7 trillion spending package. So there's a lot in it. Firstly, there's spending in it. It funds the federal government, so there's a lot to work through there. There's that aid for Ukraine as well. That's not a federal government spending item, but is an aid package for Ukraine. Something similar of that nature is disaster assistance for Americans who were affected by natural disasters, by tornadoes, by hurricanes, by wildfires, and things of that nature. It's got VA medical care in it, about $118 billion for there. But also, there are the non-spending related provisions in there that are noteworthy. One of them is a provision that bans TikTok on government devices. That's something that passed the Senate earlier. It's a Josh Hawley-backed bill. It gets added into this omnibus, and so if the omnibus passes the House, and of course if it gets signed by President Biden, there would be a ban on using TikTok on government devices. There's also the Electoral Count Act, a reform of the Electoral Count Act. That is the law that Trump allies attempted to manipulate on January 6th, when the electoral votes were being counted in the Congress to try to overturn the 2020 election and throw out those electoral votes. The Electoral Count Act has been reformed now in this omnibus, as lawmakers say, to prevent that going forward. Again, it is past the Senate. It's got to go on to the House. One thing that's not in there that's also noteworthy is something the administration had asked for, which is funding for COVID-19 measures, vaccines, testing, things of that nature. That took a back seat in this legislation, Kira.
Yeah, I was just looking now as we see what's in, what's out. So what's out? COVID aid. I guess the administration did try to make a last-ditch effort for that, right, to secure the COVID funding that they've been asking for in this bill. It was about $10 billion, right? That didn't make it in. Also, it looks like child tax credit. That extension it was pretty popular during the pandemic, which gave the families, of young children that extra, what was it, $3,500, $3,600
Yep.
during the pandemic. That did not make it either. Democrats were hoping to revive that, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that's not in there is safe banking, which would be allowing banks to do business with marijuana growers and marijuana businesses of some form. That's not in the omnibus as well. There was a push for that. But again, the thing that has to happen now is twofold. Firstly, the big thing has happened, or the big hurdle in the Senate has been passed when the omnibus passes the Senate, but now it goes on to the House. And all of this is part of a larger pitch we've seen from lawmakers of trying to show some semblance of funding the government in a relatively normal way, getting it done by their deadline. Of course, they already punted one deadline. Their original deadline was a week ago, but they've punted the deadline to give them some more time. But avoiding government shutdowns, getting these spending bills passed with some kind of efficiency and normality, that has been a priority we've seen from lawmakers, particularly the two outgoing Senate appropriators who just spoke there, one of them is sitting there in that chair on the Senate floor, Patrick Leahy, the Democrat, and then Richard Shelby, the Republican. Both of them are retiring, and both were key deal makers in getting this deal done. And as this legislation goes to the House, one thing I can tell you is that we hear from lawmakers who've been in Congress for a while that they're attempting with this omnibus, of course, to avoid a government shutdown, but also to show that Congress can still work to fund the government with, disagreement and bargaining and things of that nature, but not ultimate chaos, which would have, of course, resulted if this didn't pass by midnight on Friday. Again, it's still got to clear the House, but it looks like full steam ahead.
All right, and Daryl and Louis, let's bring you in as we look again at what's in. $45 billion for Ukraine. This is $37 billion over the administration's request. Also, $858 billion for DOD, the Department of Defense, $76 billion increase over the last year. Also, a 4.6% pay increase for military and civilian federal employees. It's interesting when you look, and also another $118.7 billion for VA medical care. That's a $21.7 billion increase. Louis, just from, if you look at what's in and what's out, clearly the war in Ukraine, our military, and disaster aid also for droughts, hurricanes, flooding, wildfires, natural disasters, all in there.
No, it is, Kara, and I can recall my days covering the Senate, and I have seen that Senate magic myself in person, and I know exactly what Jay is describing there, especially around holiday time. But you're right, it's a mishmash of different things in the omnibus, but separately we have what's called the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the NDAA. That is essentially all of the money that's going to keep the Defense Department running. That has already been passed. That is just awaiting the president's signature. The omnibus kind of deals with everything else, but it does include that $45 billion that we just described, laid out, that is going to be additional for next year. That's going to provide assistance for Ukraine in terms of keeping their government running, in terms of making up for the weaponry that the United States has already given Ukraine, and allowing Ukraine to even get more weapons down the road. Now, that's essential because that's what the administration says is going to happen. They're going to continue with the arms flow for Ukraine.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.